I never meant to eavesdrop, but when I overheard my mom mentioning renting a ballroom and hiring a live band in the same sentence, I paid attention. It turned out she was planning a lavish 18th birthday celebration for my brother Jake, with custom catering, a professional photographer, and everything in between. I stood in the hallway holding a laundry basket, feeling completely stunned. My own 18th birthday had been a potluck in our backyard served on paper plates with a cake from Walmart. I had begged for 6 months just to get that. Later that night, I found my old journal, the one with the peeling unicorn sticker on the cover. There was an entry about my birthday where she had explained that my gift money would cover the cake, leaving me with only $20 afterward. I remembered handing her the cash from my cards and thinking it was completely normal. I recalled that she patted my shoulder and assured me that being practical was a virtue, as if it were something to be proud of. When I asked Dad about Jake's party, he was in the garage, tinkering with his tools, as he always did when he didn't feel like talking. Without looking up, he simply shrugged and remarked that Jake was the one into events, implying that it wasn't a competition between us. But it wasn't really about the party, was it? It was about the numbers. I did the math. His guest list had over 100 people, friends, extended family, even his gym buddies, while mine included only 12 attendees, half of whom were members of Grandma's Bridge Club who smelled of peppermints and had the nerve to ask if I'd found a husband yet. A couple of days later, Mom lost her temper when I mentioned the $3,000 I had repaid with money from my college job. I had been working nights at a diner, saving my tips in an envelope as if I were some 1940s orphan. She accused me of being ungrateful while slamming a pot onto the stove and insisted that we had given me everything except for the benefit of the doubt, apparently. I later discovered a folder in Dad's office labeled Jake's Party in his characteristic blocky handwriting. Inside, there were invoices showing that the party cost $15,000, a sum he didn't have to beg for. Meanwhile, mine had cost only $300, yet I had been made to feel as if even that small expense was a burden. When I inquired why Jake's gift money wasn't used to offset his costs like mine had been, Mom dismissed my concerns as petty and insisted that he was different, as though that explained everything. Jake smirked when I brought up the discrepancy. He was lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone with his feet propped up on the coffee table that I had cleaned every Sunday for years. In a tone as casual as commenting on the weather, he remarked that I was just jealous because Mom and Dad liked him more. That night, I found myself in the car before my shift, crying and pressing my forehead against the steering wheel until the horn emitted a weak honk. My boss, Marta, took one look at me and sent me home with half a day's pay along with a Tupperware of tamales, noting that family could be a burden sometimes. For a moment, her simple gesture made me feel less alone. The next morning, I began receiving voicemails from Mom, in which she demanded that I stop causing drama and insisted that everything was important for Jake, reminding me that the party was in 2 weeks. My boyfriend Leo offered that I could stay with him, insisting that I shouldn't have to tolerate the situation any longer, and I've been seriously considering his offer. I've never been good at confrontation, but lately, I've been getting a little better at standing up for myself. Yesterday, while rummaging through the attic, I found my old piggy bank, a pink ceramic owl with chipped paint. Inside, I discovered the $20 from my birthday, a sum I had kept because it felt like proof, a small reminder of who I was. Eventually, I decided that I wasn't going to the party, leaving it to them to explain my absence to their 100 guests and allowing Jake to have his moment in the spotlight. Instead, I'll spend the evening at Leo's, eating tamales and finally putting that $20 to use, maybe even buying a plant that grows when cared for. It wasn't the ending anyone expected, but it was mine, and for once, that felt like enough. Now for the first update. It's been a week since I moved out. I'm writing this from my boyfriend Leo's couch, which still carries the smell of his dog, mixed with that lavender candle his mom gave us. My clothes remain in a duffel bag by the door because a part of me had hoped, maybe even expected, that my parents would eventually show up and beg me to come home. Instead, Mom left a voicemail accusing me of abandoning the family, her tone sharp and cutting. Jake sent a text with just 2 words that made everything feel final, and when I didn't reply, he went on to call me a selfish bitch. I ended up blocking his number, though I took a screenshot beforehand. Proof, I guess, that I wasn't just imagining things. A few days ago, Dad showed up at work while I was restocking shelves at the pharmacy. Marta, a coworker, let me know he was there, and when I went to see him, I found him standing by the cold medicine aisle, clutching a coffee cup as if it were a lifeline. I hadn't seen him since the night I left, and without looking me in the eye, he remarked that Mom was in a sorry state and that they just wanted me to come home. I even asked him why Jake's party had cost $15,000, but he merely stared at his shoes, mumbled that everything was complicated, and then walked away. Later that day, my aunt sent me photos from my 18th birthday that I'd completely forgotten existed. In one, Mom was scowling at the cake, as if it had insulted her directly. In another, I was seen blowing out candles alone with no one around singing. It hit me hard when I noticed the date stamp. My graduation had been on the same day as Jake's party. I had informed them months in advance, yet neither event was even mentioned. Out of the blue, Mom's best friend, Linda, called. She's the type of person who overdoes the perfume and talks as if she's divulging state secrets. She explained that my parents had gotten into a huge fight over the party budget, that Dad had taken out another loan, and that they were practically drowning in debt. I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me felt sick, while another part wanted to just laugh at the absurdity of it all. All that money wasted on a party, and they couldn't even pretend to care about my degree. While packing up my room, I discovered a letter tucked away in my old desk. It was from Mom to Grandma, written years ago. In it, she admitted she couldn't figure out how to connect with Grandma, and mentioned that dealing with Jake was easier because he reportedly needed her. I sat on the floor, my finger tracing the faded words, and for a brief moment I almost understood. Almost. Then, unexpectedly, Jake's ex-girlfriend Hannah messaged me on Instagram. We had never really talked before, and her message came off as wild and careless. She claimed that Jake had let it slip that my parents were buying him a car after the party. A Mustang, she emphasized loudly and with plenty of typos. I ended up driving to what used to be my home, now no longer mine, and confronted Dad in the driveway as he was unloading groceries while carefully avoiding my gaze. He explained that the car was meant as a reward for his grades. My hands were shaking as I recalled that I had graduated summa cum laude just last spring, and all I had received was a measly $50 gift card from Target. My graduation ceremony had taken place last weekend, though I hadn't told anyone except Leo. He arrived wearing a delicate silver chain that had once belonged to his grandmother, a token he said had been meant for me. I remember crying in my cap and gown as I hugged him tightly in the parking lot. No one else was there to share in the moment. Not long after, Mom mailed me a check for $300 with reimbursement written on the memo line. I ended up shredding it and using the scraps as makeshift confetti over Leo's trash can. It might seem petty, but it felt like reclaiming a bit of control, even if I wasn't entirely sure what I was taking back. Shortly afterwards, I discovered that Jake's band had canceled at the last minute. Linda sent me a text explaining that the replacement cost was double, and later, one of Dad's coworkers mentioned that he had taken out a second loan. It turns out their retirement savings are completely wiped out, and I can't say I felt any remorse about it. Yesterday, while at the gym, I spotted flyers for Jake's party taped up on the walls. They were boldly declaring a celebration for his 18th birthday and featured a smug photo of him. I spent some time tearing them all down, and for once, my hands were steady. This morning, Mom called with a shaky, unfamiliar voice insisting that they needed me back home. I couldn't help but picture her sitting at the kitchen table, in that same spot where she had once accused me of ingratitude. I simply refused. The silence that followed on the other end of the line was heavy, as if everyone were holding their breath. Later, when I got home, Leo's mom greeted me with an unexpectedly warm hug. She isn't one for affection. She usually keeps a cool, laid-back California vibe. But that day she held me tightly and reminded me that family isn't always about sharing the same blood. I ended up crying into her sweater, a messy, almost childish cry that I thought I'd long outgrown, and she didn't let go. I'm not going back. Not to the house, not to their version of me. I'm tired of being treated like an afterthought, a line item on their budget, a footnote in their lives. Let them drown in the consequences of their choices. For the first time, I'm stepping into my own life, ready to put on my own life jacket. It's lonely, sure, but it's quiet. And sometimes, quiet feels like the start of something new. Now for the second update. It's been 3 weeks since I last posted. A lot's happened, and honestly, I'm still processing most of it. I'll start from where everything went off track. Jake's party happened. The next morning, my aunt sent me a video of Dad stumbling on stage, slurring through a speech about how proud he was of Jake, while Mom sat in the corner crying into a napkin. The ballroom looked like it had been hit by a tornado. Streamers torn down everywhere, a punch bowl shattered on the floor, and half the guests had already left. Aunt Linda later mentioned that the venue charged an extra $2,000 for damages. When their card got declined, Jake ended up paying with cash from his gift envelope. Later that night, he sent a text that felt like he was admitting defeat and complaining about how the party went completely south. I unblocked him, but didn't reply. There wasn't much left to say. A few days after that, I ran into Dad at the grocery store. He was wearing sweatpants, something I'd never seen him in outside the house. His cart held 3 frozen pizzas and a case of beer. When he saw me, he froze like a kid caught stealing candy. Without meeting my eyes, he mentioned that they were selling the house in a voice that sounded flat, as if he had given up on arguing. I just nodded and moved on, but those 10 seconds stuck with me. That's the thing about grief. It doesn't always come in big, dramatic moments. Sometimes it shows up in your dad buying cheap beer on a random Tuesday. My mom's sister called me unexpectedly, and she didn't hold back. She informed me that mom and dad were divorcing, explaining that the party debt had been the last straw and revealing that dad had been hiding loans for years. I sat there staring at my now cold coffee, and instead of feeling relieved or vindicated, I just felt exhausted, as though I had been carrying a weight I never knew existed, and now someone else had to bear it with me. Not long after, Jake showed up at my apartment. I almost didn't let him in, but Leo gave me that look that made it impossible to say no. Jake appeared smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched and his hands stuffed in his pockets. He mumbled that he hadn't known they had taken my money, the repayment of $3,000 I made from working nights in college. I decided to show him an old journal entry in which I had written about the time Mom made me pay for my own cake. As he read it, his face grew pale, and then he pulled a check out of his wallet, a scribbled $300 in messy handwriting. He explained it was from his gift money. I accepted it, not because I needed the funds, but because he needed to give it out. A week later, Dad asked to meet at a diner he used to take me to after soccer games. He ordered pancakes that he never touched. In a low tone, he mentioned that after Jake's twin was stillborn, he had hoped that making Jake strong would somehow fix their problems. His voice cracked when he tried to explain that fixing everything was possible. Part of me wanted to cry, but I held back. While trauma might explain a lot, it couldn't erase 22 years of feeling like an afterthought, and I made sure he knew that. He simply nodded, paid the bill, and left. Then Mom's therapist called me out of the blue. Somehow she got my number. I hung up before she could finish speaking. Leo always says that setting boundaries is a work in progress, but honestly, it felt really good to just slam that door shut. Last week, Jake started community college and began working nights at a warehouse, which still feels surreal. Every now and then, he sends me silly memes, like cats in sunglasses, and I usually just reply with a thumbs up. It's not a total forgiveness, more like a quiet truce. A couple of days ago, Leo proposed. There was no ring involved, just him blurting it out while we were sharing a breakfast burrito. We've decided to handle the paperwork at the courthouse and celebrate with some tacos. No big party, no fuss. When we told his mom, she ended up crying, which made me laugh. A genuine, unforced laugh that I hadn't heard from myself in years. A few days later, Mom mailed a wedding card with a $20 bill tucked inside. The note simply expressed congratulations. In a way that felt fitting, I donated it to the youth shelter down the street. When the volunteer asked if I wanted a receipt, I told her to keep it. Yesterday, Dad texted me a photo of my old piggy bank sitting on his desk. There wasn't any message with it. I didn't reply, but I couldn't bring myself to delete the photo either. I saw Mom at the pharmacy last week. She was picking up allergy meds, and for a moment, our eyes met before she turned away as if I were a stranger. It stung, although not as much as I had feared. I'm not the villain in all this. I'm just done. Done keeping score. Done waiting for apologies that will never come. Last weekend, Leo and I painted the guest room a soft sunlight yellow. We haven't decided what to do with it yet, but it feels nice to have a space that isn't haunted by the past. Quiet is underrated, you know? It's not the loud, dramatic kind of freedom I once imagined. It's smaller. It's softer. The kind of freedom where you wake up and realize you're no longer bracing for the next blow. Maybe that's enough. Now for the final update. It's been 6 months since my last update. Some days it feels like a lifetime, and other days like nothing's changed at all. But here's where things stand now. Jake showed up at my door 2 months ago, soaked from the rain. Dad's apartment had flooded, and he had nowhere else to go. I let him crash on the couch, mostly because Leo raised an eyebrow as if to say, "Really?" and I didn't have the energy to argue. The first week was awkward, with him shuffling around in socks with holes, and me pretending not to notice how he would stare at the family photos on our walls. But then he started cooking. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti or stir-fry, and he would leave a plate for me on the counter with a post-it note that said "for later." One time he asked about my day while scrubbing a pan. His back turned to me. I froze halfway through a bite of garlic bread because no one in my family had ever asked me that sincerely. Dad's health took a nosedive around the same time. The doctor diagnosed him with emphysema. He called me with a raspy voice and asked if I would have lunch with him. I brought tacos to his cramped studio apartment, the same kind he used to hate when I was a kid, claiming they were messy. He picked at the tortilla and then apologized so quietly that I almost missed it. I didn't know what to do with that. Apologies from him always felt like someone handing me a wrapped box with nothing inside. Mom barged in halfway through, screaming about how I had stolen Jake and Dad from her. Her mascara was smudged and her hair was wild, while Dad just stared at his hands. I left the tacos on the table and walked out. Later that night, I noticed a 4-inch scratch along my car door. The cop who took the report recognized her and muttered that it was the 3rd time that month. When Jake heard about it, he showed up at the station unprompted and gave a statement. A restraining order arrived a week later. He didn't apologize. He only nodded when I thanked him, as if he was finally seeing the cost of loyalty. Dad moved to Arizona to live with his sister. He texts me photos of cacti now, captioned "hotter than hell here." I don't reply, but I save them in a folder labeled "maybe." According to her Facebook, Mom is working the graveyard shift at a diner. Jake mentioned that she eats her meals at the counter, always staring at the door. I never asked how he knew. Leo and I paid off my student loans last month. We celebrated at the same taco place where he proposed, and the waiter recognized us by bringing free churros. When I told Jake, he sent me $3,000 through Venmo, the exact amount I had repaid our parents years ago. He explained that it was for the baby, even though I hadn't told him yet. I'm stashing it in a savings account in case his kids ever need it more than I did. Speaking of the baby, I'm due next month, and we're calling her Hope. Jake was the first to know. He showed up with a onesie bearing the inscription "Auntie's favorite," which I found ironic, and a stack of parenting books from a thrift store. He advised me to check out the highlighted parts. I haven't opened them yet, but I will. Mom tried to sue me for elder abuse last month, but the court dismissed it the same day. My therapist says it's her way of refusing to blame herself. She's probably right, but I'm too tired to care. The same week, a package arrived, a handmade crib, sanded smooth and stained with the warm color of honey. There was no note, but I would recognize Dad's woodwork anywhere. Leo assembled it in the nursery while I sat on the floor, running my fingers over the grooves. The letter from Mom came yesterday. It read that she was sorry I had felt unloved. Leo wanted to burn it. I almost did. But then I pictured Hope, years from now, wondering why Grandma wasn't around. So I tucked it into the back of my journal next to the entry for the $20 piggy bank. Not for closure, just as proof. We're not having a baby shower. There's no registry and no pastel balloons. Just us, tacos al pastor, and that stupid piggy bank on the table. When people ask why, I say that parties stress me out. But honestly, it's because I want her first memory to be quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ache. The other night, Jake burned the garlic bread. We stood in the kitchen, waving smoke out the window, and he joked about being the fun uncle who would teach her bad habits. I laughed at the moment, but later I ended up crying, not with heaving sobs like before, just with a slow leak. Leo held me and reassured me that it was okay to miss the things I never had. Maybe that's what breaking cycles is all about. It isn't some victory lap or a parade. It's burnt garlic bread, a crib with no note, a letter you don't quite believe in kept just in case. I don't know if I'm doing this right, but I'm here. And for now, that's enough.